Buzz Lightyear and breaking things, so I'm very much going to stick to that. Those of you who are local, or those of you who are only visiting Cardiff for a day, I've tried to put as many pictures of heritage from Cardiff and the area in that for you to enjoy. So if you want to play some kind of bingo to keep yourself awake, I must disclose there's no archaeology and I'm not an archaeologist. So the bingo might be all that keeps you going. So I wanted to talk about conservation and use and damage. The concept of use, I think, is something that the term appears as if it's a different kind of an activity. So on the first, we have a beautiful, tidy store. Full disclosure, that's not in Wales. Then we have, yes, we're back in Wales. Then we have people touching things in an exhibition, all the way through to Professor of Archaeology, Jackie Mulville, respectfully engaging with some archaeological heritage in York. Now, I think we all recognize drinking out of the cup as use. We probably think of touching as some kind of mediated use, and we have in our minds that in this static store, which is a little tiny bit sterile, that's not use at all. And those are the kind of ideas and thoughts I'd like to explore, and particularly looking then at the benefits that we can get from breaking away from those ideas and away from some of our perceptions and perhaps biases that have snuck into our thinking. So let's start with the myth. The perfect preservation system, the park is locked. The grass is intact. None of the metal is being worn away at all. So, a perfect preservation strategy. Now, we can see how ridiculous that is in this context, but it's interesting how quickly we can turn the locked museum, the locked archaeological site, into a perfect preservation strategy. I myself prefer this. This is Poppy again. This is now engaging with our heritage. Admittedly, they're doing dinosaur noises, which I think is important. But whether you're introducing new or old audiences to the heritage, it's only through our audiences that heritage has any meaning. It's only through our audiences that heritage has any life. So we tend to think of these things as use. This is an object properly from a museum and me handling it. For those who are aficionados of the Cardiff city, that's the Barry Horns, absolute local legend. So there I am handling the Barry Horns actual FIFA World Cup European Championship trophy. And wearing a little bit of away, getting grease on it, risking dropping it. Now that's definitely use. But of course, the preservation of this stuff is the preservation of keeping things alive, isn't it? Because it's only through going to visit Dufferin Gardens, it's only going to visit historic houses with your friends, it's only through seeing the things that matter to you, like the Welsh football in a museum, that you start to think that I belong. The museum is for me. The museum tells my story. And that's important. Those of us who, many of us have had to face campaigns to save museums or heritage sites or organizations over the last however long we've been in the heritage. And the only way we ever save those sites and those places is by mobilizing the people who find meaning inside of them and with them, even on the days that they don't visit. If they know that the museum has Fred Keno's medals and you care about who Fred Keno is, then you care about whether that museum exists or not. And so for me, a preservation strategy is intimately associated with use. Now, I'm a conservator. Most of you who are archaeologists will know what a conservator is. But a conservator is traditionally portrayed as the science person with the lab coat. Rarely are we allowed out in dresses to events with archaeologists, but we're normally staying in our labs doing science. But the conservation isn't just about turning up on sites, telling people not to use things, telling people not to touch things, pouring adhesive over things. Conservation is more than that. And I think that for all of us, when we're looking at what we do with our heritage, we can find ourselves, especially if we spent ages, getting out the ground or looking after it, we can find ourselves really fixated on the materiality. The materiality, which, I love the materiality. I love getting my hands on archaeology. But we can become a bit fixated with that materiality must go forward into the future. But actually, that's not even practical. We know from science, we know from entropy, we know that there's no interaction without reaction. So we know that if we want to carry things into the future, it must evolve. It must continue and go forward. So in fact, what conservators are doing when they preserve things is ensuring the ongoing joy, the ongoing engagement. And that's part of the access to cultural heritage. But obviously, that involves change. And I think the words change and damage are so interestingly interchangeable. This is the one picture that hasn't worked because they've used a PDF instead of the live slide. But behind the picture of the policeman, is the picture of Newport City Council destroying the Chartist mural, which many of us from South Wales will remember. This is the policeman recognising that the destruction of the Chartist mural in Newport City Council was something somewhat problematic and passing bits that had fallen off the wall by a digger to members of the public who were barricaded outside. You know, that is, if our access to heritage is through barricades and mediated and controlled, then there's never a lively access to heritage. But it gets me really excited about the concept of damage. I've got two sons, so I've learned a lot about football. And this is an Ajax shield from 2011. It's the most famous of all their shields, the only one of this particular, I forgot which one it was, I think it was European Championship. They won loads of them, but they only have one on display. And the one they have on display is the one that they were carrying on the open-top bus tour, and they dropped it. They dropped it off the bus, and you can see here the big dent. And it's the big dent that gives this one the best story. And that's just such a potent reminder to me that the concept of damage is just about not recognizing the stories that we see in the change that things change. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a conservative, and when it comes to damage, we do like a bit. Because if you break stuff, then we get to fix it. And we've got like amazing mad skills. So we do enjoy doing the fixing, and we do enjoy being paid to do the fixing in particular. But nonetheless, what that does do is that in a group of archaeologists or a group of museologists, the conservators are always there when things get broken, because who are you going to call? You're going to call the conservator. So you can end up, my sort of profession, can end up always being there when things go wrong. And there is a real danger when you're always involved in things go wrong. First of all, you become associated with bad things happening. And the other thing is that you get what's called an availability bias. That's the thing that you see all the time. And that becomes quite unfortunate because on the one hand, someone who's maybe doing engagement work sees the access, sees the school visit, sees all the fun that people are having engaging. But if during that process of engagement somebody drops something, then it gets taken to the conservator. So the conservator gets like a concentration of all the things that have gone wrong. And it can make you perceive that the access is more problematic, and it can make a perception of access and preservation as being in conflict. But I always think that access and preservation are not in conflict. We just have to stand far enough back and look broad enough to find out where the synergy is. But obviously, when your job is looking down the microscope and cleaning at tiny, tiny levels, it is sometimes stand back. So when I was talking about damage, one thing I promised I had to talk about was Buzz Lightyear. And so here we are. And this is Buzz Lightyear from a museum store. It's from a National Trust store. I was actually looking for the cowboy whose name I forgot last time and I've forgotten this time. Woody, thank you very much. But I couldn't find one. But I actually quite like Buzz Lightyear. Now, if we keep Buzz Lightyear in a box, what are the risks? I hope you appreciate that I have not used traffic light colours on my arrows, because I'm not trying to say that things are bad and good. But if I don't play with Buzz Lightyear, he won't get scratched. If I don't play with Buzz Lightyear, I might not break his joints. If I don't play with Buzz Lightyear, the plasticizers which come out of the plastic, they're going to come out whatever, whether I play with it or not. And probably it'll be decayed in no time. If I play with Buzz Lightyear, I might lose the box or the number. But I tell you what, if we don't deploy the jetpack from time to time, how do we know why Buzz Lightyear is important? Why do we care about Buzz Lightyear? If we don't go, that's the point of Buzz Lightyear. And I think that this is the important thing. Sometimes we can add up all the things that can go wrong and ignore the things that can go right, because basically they're more often intangible things. And I'm going to take it back to a concrete South Wales example. This was the Banksy that appeared, the first Banksy in South Wales. Appeared in Port Talbot before Christmas. It was related to Christmas. The snow was appearing on the kid, but if you went around the corner, you saw fire. You could see that the snow wasn't snow, but in fact pollution. This appeared at the end of a lane. on a particular date, the first date that the tolls went from the bridge between Bristol and Cardiff, at a particular time at Christmas in a particular location, because Port Talbot is one of the most heavily polluted areas. You saw it in one way because there was one way to come at it up the road, but you saw the other side of the story when you went round. So this piece of art had a huge authenticity connected to place and time and location. But from the moment it appeared, the media narrative was, we must save the Banksy. We must save the Banksy. I wasted many hours on social media discussing this with, nice people about this, because I was saying, is it saved? And I think what happened was it was saved. A man with a lot of money got some builders and they carved it off the wall and they put it on a pallet. And the man, to be fair, whose garage it was, he was quite stressed, so he was quite happy to get the money. But he put it on a pallet, painted his logo on it, put it in a store for 9 months, I think you could go and see. And then, do you know what he did? Did the very worst thing you can do. He took it to England. Did we save the Banksy? Or didn't we? I don't think we saved the Banksy. I think nothing about that is the Banksy. The tangible thing is still there, but the intangible thing, to me, is lost. And so I think when we're thinking about access and conservation and benefits and damage, we have to start broadening our mind about what it is that we want to save and for how long and for whom. Because for sure, even though Michael Sheen did pay for the barriers, that Banksy wouldn't have lasted for very long in that location. But I tell you what, those people visiting, many of them may never visit an art gallery. And so we have to ask those questions about when we have access over a shorter period in a location like this, is that access, how valuable is that access? And this is quite a problem because we have to engage with risk, because we don't know what's going to happen for sure. We kind of had an inclination from the moment the man paid a lot of money, but we don't know for sure what's going to happen. If we invite the notoriously difficult to manage school group, a friend of mine does supply teaching, and he's teaching in Cathedral School, which, if you don't know Cardiff, is the poshest school. And he was just telling me he thought the school kids had been sent home because it's the first time he's not taught in a more ordinary school. And he thought they'd gone home because they were so quiet, never been in such a quiet school. But if you work in a museum and a gallery, you do hear people saying, oh, the kids from that school are quite a problem. The kids from that school can do a lot of damage. They can be more damaging. These, people aren't trained in the niceties of how to engage with heritage. And so what we have sometimes is when we say, let's have a risky event, let's take a risk. Sometimes some people, often many of us, we might be, in a sense, the custodians. We're the ones who asked, is it worth to take the risk? Can we get away with it? Somebody else, John Sargent or someone, will appear and say, what a wonderful event, isn't it great to be accessible, and so on and so forth. If it all goes well, the local councillors will take the credit. But if it all goes badly, it's us. We were to blame. Why didn't you see that was coming? Why didn't you take more precautions? Why didn't you stop those people from coming and doing those things? So we have a real issue, don't we, with heritage, that if we are responsible for the heritage, we do feel a responsibility. And this drags us into kind of conversations that we may not want to have. And I think that we often feel that we speak for things, and we often feel that we speak for taking things to future generations. But the difficulty with this is, it's the won't anyone think of the children problem, is that if you feel that you're acting selflessly on behalf of something else, on behalf of the heritage for the future, then what happens is that your communications can become quite like the lady on The Simpsons who has the won't anyone think of the children banner. We can get a bit that way, so we can become actually quite poor communicators, bad at reception, not really listening to things. And I think that if we have a very strong belief that our actions are morally good and selfless, we can actually become quite dogmatic in our approach, which is another one of the biases that I wanted to talk about. Now, this is, again, back to doing conservation at Cardiff University. These are the kind of questions that we ask. Obviously, we do like talking about glue, and we have many, many classes to talk about glue. But at the same time, if you were going to repair, this is a three-legged doll in a China dress-up shop, and she'd got dropped, possibly by a museum member of staff. She'd been dropped, but the artist was still alive, and so the student Tanya was able to communicate with the artist about that. And Tanya didn't know whether it should be fixed, whether it should be fixed invisibly, whether she wanted it, because it looked kind of like a Polly Pockets, so she didn't know if she wanted it to still look like that. So before you could really choose the glue, before you could do too much more, I mean, you understand how it got broken, but before you can do too much more, you have to decide things about what story we're telling. And to find that out, you have to ask who cares about something. And so all conservation decisions start with who cares about something, what stories do we want to tell, and whose values are we going to conserve. And that's a very interesting thing, because values are not neutral, are they? Values are loaded. One of the particularly problematic and challenging things about working with stories and values is how messy people are. You know, people keep changing their minds and all sorts. I love this object. It was conserved by Leah. It's from Brecknock Museum. It's a pop-up suffragette. And at some point, this is basically trolling. Somebody thought it'd be really, really good way to stop a woman from wanting a vote if he made a little picture of her, put her in a box, and then popped her through the letterbox, because then she was going to see that if she campaigned for votes for women, she'd become super ugly, and that she should really put those kind of thoughts aside. Now, we don't know what she thought when this particular piece of trolling arrived through her door. It was before the internet, so they had to make do. But what we do know is that she kept it. And it had a door, and you can see how much the hinge has been worn, can't you, here? You can see that she and her family have pinged that suffragette up over and over again. And what we know, that the grandmother, whether she was upset or not, when she got it, she passed it to her daughter and then to her granddaughter. And by now, her granddaughter was so proud of her mum, her grandmother, for being a suffragette, that she made sure it went to a museum. And then it came to us, so that we could think about how do we conserve that. Now, we don't want to fix away all the evidence of use. We don't want to fix away the sense of motion. We don't want to make her look less ugly. We want to tell as much of the story through the tangible evidence as we can. And that is a fascinating thing, because when we do interventions as archaeologists or conservators, you know, you're in with the archaeology, you scrape it all off it goes to the spoil heap. It's kind of done, isn't it? It's very hard to undo that sort of thing. So we do have to make tangible binary decisions to clean this or not to clean this, to remove this, to not remove this, to leave it in situ, to remove it somewhere else. We make these binary decisions, but all the time we're making them about stories and about values. And we have to remember that those values change. And I think that that's a really interesting and difficult challenge, but only one that we're going to be successful with if we engage with other people. So there we are, us conservators trying to preserve things for posterity. This is a smock in Abergavenny Museum. There was a group of heritage scythers who wanted to wear the smock and asked the museum if they could wear it to scythe in the field. And the museum staff initially said no, because that's not really what you traditionally do with your heritage collections. But the conservator there, Megan, was doing a degree with us, and she asked if she could do it as a project. And as that project, she invited the heritage scythers in. They did a huge amount of work about participation. They did lots of lovely things, like making sure that the smock was on the table and meeting people at the door, so that you didn't turn up with the smock, but the smock was there. They did a condition assessment together. They talked about how it would work. They looked at the stitching together, and they came up with a strategy to do the scything, which meant not the person who wanted to do the scything, but someone who was a lot smaller. But they decided that that was going to happen because the living heritage of that smock was more important than if some of the stitching came off in the shoulder. But the person who really wanted to wear it was too big, and he would have done too much damage. So that was kind of negotiated. That relationship went so well that the group stayed involved in the museum for many years to come. And I think that, this idea that we allow things to evolve, that they become heritage, they become archaeology, they become into our domain, it doesn't mean that we need to stop the history. Because I think we should understand our objects and our heritage as something which enables a connection between people. If you're from South Wales, you will know what that clock means, and it will almost make you cry, because it tells one of the most powerful stories of coal mining heritage. about how a group of children lost their lives with a coal slip on the 21st of October. And the clock stopped at the moment that the coal engulfed the primary school. Now, it doesn't go round, it doesn't tick. It's got scratches on it, it's got dents on it, but it's not damaged. It's a perfect storytelling device. There are so many other things in so many collections that carry the scars and the narratives with them. And it's those scars and those narratives that's so important. I won't do the T-shirt because I'm looking at the time. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about neutrality, which, as you can probably tell from all my images, I'm not particularly interested in. But neutrality is something that we often try to do with our gap fills and our repairs. Let's make it so you can hardly tell that we were there. Let's be beige, let's be grey, let's be almost not hit in the eye. And when we do that kind of thing, what are we saying about what happened in the past? That all the things that brought us here are just kind of just to be blurred, whereas perhaps what we should be doing is saying, how did this get snapped? How did this get broken? So Ellie, one of our students who is quite fun, wanted to do her gap fills in bright pink. And she wanted to do it because she wanted to tell the story of how the damage happened. She wanted to draw attention to it. It's not kintsugi because it's not about a celebration of damage. In this situation, it was actually talking about some harm that had happened. And I think that's very, very interesting when we start to get that. But we've really got to say this thing about neutrality is that we are not in a neutral cultural heritage landscape. It is not a microcosm of society that is here today. We are not representative of the people of Cardiff or the people of the UK. We are, unfortunately, in heritage, a tiny bit unrepresentative. So when we talk about keeping things for the future, we have to think about what it is that when we keep things for the future, because we're making an assumption about the future, and we're making an assumption that that future, those future people, have this value. But hang on a minute, if they're the same as us, then perhaps we're not willing to accept change. I love this because it's being preserved and it's not being preserved. It's a Canadian plane crashed in Cardiff. But we have to start realizing that ideas of equal access can't be delivered in an unequal society. Because our cultural heritage access isn't equitable, we need to make changes if we want to attempt to deliver equity. And so we do have to change who gets in. We have to make sure that we recognize if we're doing gatekeeping, if we're trying to put up barriers to people gaining access, thinking about that we're acting neutrally for future generations. Well, surely we're virtuous, it's not for us. But actually what we're doing is we're saying we don't want to see any change in who accesses. That is a niece licking a museum object. Amgueddfa Cymru. I don't think there's anyone here from Amgueddfa Cymru, so I think it's another crime I've got away with. This is a fantastic project from Amgueddfa Cymru, the Ways of Working project in Nazia. This is Clive of India's sofa. Clive of India's sofa is an 18th century giltwood sofa. 18th century gilt, which means that the joints are going to be quite old, the glue will have decayed. It's not a strong thing anymore. But Nazia and the Ways of Working group were invited to do decolonial projects with Amgueddfa Cymru, and this was a project at St Fagans. And what she asked was, can I sit on the sofa? You'd be pleased to know that Nazia got to sit on the sofa. There's another one with about 8 people on it, which I know gives the head of conservation palpitations. But the point is that lots of people have sat on that sofa in the past. If we start saying, we're stopping now, we're not evolving, we're drawing a line, we're saying all the people who got to sit in the past, they got to do their bit of the damage or their bit of the change. But the people now, the people we should be trying to welcome in through the doors, they don't get to do those. And I think it's important to start thinking about that sort of equity in practical terms. So this is a terrible diagram I made. It's a real lesson to young archaeologists. Don't dash off a diagram and send it off to a journal thinking you're going to get a chance to fix it, because you don't. But anyway, here's my terrible diagram. The point is that we're so used to keeping things for long times that our job is to make the value last as long as possible, over as long a lifetime as we possibly can. Conservators have mad skills, archaeologists have mad skills, but we can be deploying them not just to keep things for more lifetimes, but to keep things for more life experiences. And that's what we should be deploying our skills for, and asking those questions. What experiences should we be seeking out, and what experiences should we be enjoying? Because things don't last forever. I love the idea of thinking of our heritage as a slow event. If we think of it as a slow event, we can suddenly see the potential to do so many things. I'm sure Fionn could do lots with a slow event, involving masks normally. But this is the Barry Pride March banner, collected by Amgueddfa Cymru, the National Museum of Wales. It's made of PVC. Ask any conservator. You'll be lucky if you have that in 50 years. Now, for 50 years, I could put it in a box. I could keep it longer if I took away the oxygen. I could keep it longer if I kept it cold. But what exactly is the point of that? Isn't it better to get it out from Pride Week and hang it in the museum once, for a week of a year? Isn't it better to look at why it was that Barry had their first Pride March only in the last 10 years? It's quite shocking if you think about that. Isn't it good to get these objects out and reflect on them? Which means that we have to accept that things aren't going to be forever, and instead of which, think about how we're using them meaningfully to do the things that you want to do. I want to achieve social justice. Whatever it is that you want to do, I think we can argue to use them for those things. Oops. I just wanted to say that conservators are creative, archaeologists are creative, we're all creative. But creative isn't just about art. Creativity is about thinking. Creativity is about breaking out of habits and practices. And, this is a little bit of a great and a good occasion. So, let's think about our creativity. What new solutions, what new ideas? How can we transcend traditional rules and relationships? How can we imagine new relationships and new possibilities? So this is really what I wanted to end on. How do we envision the future of our profession? And these are I'm a lecturer, so I have to do the summary. Change and damage are not the same thing. If you don't change, there are risks. So we cannot just see change as a bad thing. We have to look at both sides. We have to recognize the power and privilege that sometimes we are enacting through gatekeeping, through looking after things. What we're actually doing is expressing our control. We have to challenge our own wisdom. How do we know there's multiple stories if we don't ask people to tell us them? How do we hear if we don't listen? And there is not one narrative. There's not one narrative about Clive of India, and Nazia has told her narrative. There are other narratives to come. Yes, we want to keep things to enable those narratives of the future, but we don't want to keep them at the expense of the now. There isn't only one way to do things. It is hard, I think, particularly when you're young, you feel like you have to do them the right way. But, there is no best. Best is just best for someone. It's not best for everyone. So let's enjoy our stuff, our heritage. Let's share the rewards and share the risks. Let's be emotional and let's be creative. Thank you.